Good evening, everyone. Welcome. My name's Jeremy. I'm leading these sessions this month. This is number... closer to the mic. This is number 3 of 5. Better. I'm calling this cutting through appearances. So the ideas that we're focusing on, discussing and meditating on is these teachings from the Buddha about how we tend to get, our minds tend to get deceived by deceptive appearances, and how these deceptive appearances give rise to what are called afflictive states of mind, the states of mind that bother us, that cause us problems. And by identifying how our mind is being deceived by these, we can correct these deceptive appearances, and then by doing so pacify the afflictive states of mind. So it's quite an interesting process, and particularly when you discover that some aspect of your way of thinking is mistaken, that things are appearing to you in a mistaken way. And by seeing through that, cutting through that appearance, then sort of frees you and releases your mind from the various problems that come from that mistaken appearance. So last week we were talking about attachment and aversion. So attachment being defined as this state of mind which is looking at an object and exaggerating its good qualities, and based on that projecting those good qualities onto the object as though they come from the side of the object, so whether it's a person or a thing, and then seeking, having a craving or grasping towards the object based on that projection. So even though the appearance is very convincing that this beautiful quality or desirable quality or excellent qualities coming from the side of the object, when we investigate, we find that it's actually a projection of our mind, even though it's completely convincing. And so by seeing through that, by seeing how that your mind is doing that, then that frees you from that strong grasping at that object, because you can see that the quality is actually a projection of your mind. So that's a good example. So this week I thought we could focus on awareness of impermanence. So this is going a little bit deeper, I think, maybe more subtle, deceptive appearance about how things tend to appear in an unchanging way, having some kind of unchanging essence. And so the mind, mistaken ideas like attachment and aversion are said to arise from having those kind of mistaken appearance of things appearing to be permanent or unchanging. Anyway, we'll go into that in more detail. So as I say frequently, these sessions are designed to be fairly relaxed and discursive, so feel free to disagree with anything I say. Just hold the thought and ask questions at the end if I have time for discussion. So the Buddha was very keen on people challenging his ideas, and so you're invited to do that, and then you have good learning through debate and discussion. Before we get into that, we'll do some meditation. So there are said to be 2 types of meditation, at least in this tradition. So one is concentration, where you're focusing your mind on one single object. And the other one is called analytical meditation, where you're analysing a particular idea. So in this case we'll be looking at the idea of impermanence. And we'll do some concentration meditation first. So with all meditation you need these 2 tools or mental faculties. So one is Normally, the term used is mindfulness, which means remembering the object, keeping in mind the object you've chosen to focus on. So, and the other one is introspection, which means part of your mind is observing what's going on with the concentration. So when your mind starts to wander, it brings it back to that object. So we need to identify both of those tools, those mental faculties, and use them in our meditation, both in the concentration meditation and in analytical meditation. So we'll do both of those. Okay, so firstly just relax your body and your mind. So you can relax your mind by forgetting about all the things that you've been busy with in your life. Give yourself permission to not think about those things for the next hour. So it's fine to stop thinking about them for an hour. Just bring your awareness to your body. Check how your body's feeling. Release any tension in your body, relax. Sit in a posture that's comfortable. It also allows you to remain alert, not get sleepy. Usually helpful to have your back straight, your eyes slightly open, to let some light in. Then just observe your breath moving in and out. Through your nostrils if you can, or through your mouth is fine. So just let the breath come in and out naturally, don't force it. Just observe it moving in and out naturally. So just doing this is immediately a break or a release from all the busy thoughts that we've been occupied with during the day, giving our mind a rest from that. Okay, so using mindfulness, we focus our mind on the breath, particularly at the point just under the tip of the nose, breath moving in and out past that point. And introspection is observing to see whether the concentration remains there or starts to wander off, as it tends to do, as we know. So you're placing your focus on that point, not using a lot of force, just resting it there, but also remaining alert to observe when it starts to wander. Okay, so try and hold your concentration on that point, on the breath, for the duration of 21 breaths. Just count silently to yourself. So in and out is one breath. If your mind starts to wander off, just bring it back. If you've lost count, then you can start again. Place the mind on the object without letting it wander. Okay, so now that we have developed some degree of concentration, we can use that to do analytical meditation. So we'll do meditation on impermanence, starting firstly with examining the impermanence of our body. So we may tend to have thoughts about our body as being unchanging, as in we assume that the body I have today is the same as it was yesterday or last year. We have this kind of idea of it having this unchanging kind of essence. But if we examine the body, then we can't find anything in the body that is unchanging. So, for example, if you look at the various systems that operate in your body, like your respiratory system, breathing in and out. So we're breathing approximately 550 litres of oxygen a day. So a lot of activity happening in our breathing, in our respiratory system, in our cardiovascular system. The blood's moving at 216 kilometres per hour, apparently. So it's literally whizzing around our body. And then the digestive system is hard at work, digesting about 2 kilograms of food a day, turning it into energy. And then you look at all the various structures within your body. So we have 78 organs busily performing all their various functions. The heart's beating around 100,000 times a day, pumping about 7,000 litres per day. So just by thinking about these systems, we see there's so much activity going on in the body. It's so busy doing all of these things. And then all of the other parts of the body that are not necessarily so active, like the muscles and the skin and the bones. But if we examine them closely, they're all made up of moving parts. So if you look at the microstructures of the body, so the cells, for example, 100 trillion cells apparently in the human body, and within the cells are the nucleus, within the chromosomes, the DNA, the molecules, down to the atomic level. So protons within the atoms, which are moving at 400 kilometers per second. So focusing on the body, analysing it this way, we see that it's actually a collection of highly active parts. There's nothing static, nothing remaining static even for a second within the body. We can't find anything. So even the bones are made up of all these highly active parts. So even though we have this idea that my body is the same as it was this morning, we can't actually find anything which has remained the same. It's just an appearance. We apply the same analysis to our mind. So our mind is a collection of firstly sense perceptions, sight, sound, feeling, smell and taste. So all this information coming into our mind through our senses. The feelings of pleasant, unpleasant and neutral we have towards all the objects that appear in our mind. All the emotions that run through our mind, happiness and sadness, love, animosity, contentment, frustration. So these are all also in flux, constantly flowing, not static for even a second. All the various conceptions that we occupy with, memories and aspirations, thoughts and ideas. And then the same analysis applied to all the external objects, the objects outside of our mind and body. So all the people around us are exactly the same in being impermanent, changing from moment to moment. Their body and their mind. So even though things might appear to be static, when we analyse, we can't find anything that's stationary in their body and mind for even a second. So that applies to all the humans and the animals and the insects, and then also the physical objects, in what we call inanimate. The objects that we possess, all of our possessions, if we analyse, are all made up of moving parts, constantly changing, not static, not permanent. The environment around us. So the water is more obviously changing, waves and tides, currents, rain and evaporation. And organic matter we can see as growing and seeds and sprouts, trees, and then decaying, going back to the soil in a cycle. And then even the most solid elements, the earth and the rocks and the tectonic plates and even the planets, even the galaxies, all in a state of flux, not static. So then when you apply this same analysis to our life, so as we all know, whoever is born will necessarily die. So death is inevitable. That's something that we like to ignore, but it's undeniable. So in 100 years, everyone in this room will no longer be here, I expect. So this is just meditating on reality. These are all things that we know to be true. But we focus our mind on these truths in order to change our normal perception of the way we see the world. So we also know that death, the time of death is uncertain, so we can pass away at any minute. So there are so many things that can cause death at any time, and many people who are young and healthy pass away without warning. So the purpose of this meditation is not to frighten you or to make you feel uneasy or disturbed. It's just to challenge the view of the world of being static, unchanging, to let go of that, because that view is causing us problems. By mistaking the way things are and thinking that they are permanent when they are actually impermanent, we create a lot of problems for ourselves. So just focus your mind on that sense of impermanence of everything, your body, mind, other people, physical objects, your life. Just focus on that feeling for a minute. So by focusing on that, we're familiarizing our mind with that understanding, that awareness of impermanence, which acts to counter our tendency to grasp at permanence. Okay, then just relax your concentration. Okay, any comments or questions about that meditation? Or complaints? So that's quite, I think the idea is quite simple, but it can be quite, I think you can see it can be quite effective in changing the way we normally see things, and maybe a little bit unnerving. So focusing on meditation on death is ironically or counterintuitively said to make your mind much happier. If you have awareness of death, of our inevitable death, and also that we can pass away at any minute, that can make us much more appreciative of what we have, of the things we have and the people around us, and also when you're with someone, you can sort of treasure that moment because you realise it's fleeting, something precious rather than being something very ordinary and boring. And also, awareness of death is said to keep your mind focused on the present, because we realise that the past is a memory, as they say, and the future is a fantasy. So we have control over the present, so it encourages us to keep our mind focused on the present, which also keeps your mind more peaceful and makes your life much more manageable, I think, if you can keep your mind focused on the present moment rather than worrying about the future or regretting the past, etc. Anyway, so have a think about that, meditation on impermanence, and let me know how you go, whether you find that useful or not. So, as I said, what we're focusing on in these sessions is this idea about identifying the ways in which our minds get deceived by the way things appear, for example, with things appearing to be permanent when they're actually impermanent, and then identifying how these deceptive states of mind or deceptive appearances give rise to problems, and these, particularly how they give rise to these afflictive emotions. So, as we were talking about last week, attachment is an afflictive emotion because when we're strongly grasping onto something, we feel unhappy if we can't get that thing or that person or that experience. And then when we do get it, we can experience disappointment because it doesn't live up to our expectations. Or we can feel anxiety because we're worried about losing it, someone taking it away from us. Or we can experience not being able to enjoy it because we're so worried about losing it. So it defeats the purpose of having it. And also then when we lose it, we suffer because we feel we've lost something very precious. So this is all problems arising from attachment. And attachment is arising from this deceptive appearance of something, as I said before, we're projecting these exaggerated qualities onto that object. Feel free to disagree. You might argue that the object has those, some objects have those beautiful qualities that we see in them. But the argument that the Buddha is making is when we investigate it, we find that it's, the closer we look, the harder it is to find those beautiful qualities. So I'm not saying that beauty doesn't exist, it's just saying that beauty is an appearance to the mind, and we project that appearance onto an object, but the object itself, it doesn't have that quality. It's something that our mind is projecting. Otherwise, everyone who saw that object would see it the same way, but that's not how it works, is it? You see some architecture you think is really fabulous, and then someone else thinks it's ghastly, or vice versa. You know, you walk around the suburbs and see a house and my God, how could anyone build think that that's a nice house? So everyone has a different idea of beauty. And when we look closely, we can't find it in the object. As I said, feel free to disagree, challenge that idea. So then if you look close, examine more closely, so the idea here is that these afflictive states of mind arising on these appearances, and they're sort of like layers, so beneath attachment and aversion, this mind of exaggerating the good and bad qualities, like why does the mind do that? Why do we project those qualities onto that object? Why do we have that sort of habit of doing that? And this is said to occur because of more subtle misconceptions about the object, so the object of attachment or aversion. And one of those misconceptions is called grasping at permanence. So when we talk about permanence here, we're not talking about things lasting forever, we're talking about things having some kind of unchanging essence. So you think about someone you dislike, for example, a politician, someone who appears to you as unpleasant all the time, and then if you examine the mind of aversion you're having towards that person, dislike, you can see how you're sort of projecting some kind of unchanging, unpleasant essence to that person, unchanging quality. But then, as we saw in that meditation, when you examine closely, you can't find anything that's permanent about that person. So then how can this impermanent person made up of all these moving parts with no staticness, how can they have this unchanging, unpleasant essence that we're seeing in them? So they looked unpleasant last week, they looked unpleasant last year. Tonight on the news they're still looking unpleasant. So it's appearing strongly to our mind, this sort of unchanging quality. So that's the idea, that we're projecting this awfulness onto that object, but we can't find it from the side of the object. And there might be other people who will look at that same person and think they're wonderful and see them exactly the opposite way to how we're seeing them, and projecting wonderfulness onto them, an unchanging essence of wonderfulness. So you can see how these are projections of the mind, and when we examine closely, we can't find them. So that's the idea. So based on this idea of permanence, then we develop these other misconceptions about attachment and aversion. So you're seeing some kind of unchanging personness, and then based on that you might project awfulness, and then based on that give rise to more stronger afflictive emotions like hatred, or violence, wanting to harm them, or being stressed or anxious or depressed about how this person got to power, for example. And so all these problems are arising from this misunderstanding. So that's the idea of impermanence, of permanence. Sorry. So these meditations are designed at addressing that that misconception. So we meditate on the fact that everything about that person is changing, and also same applies to our perception of that person or that object. That the way our mind is perceiving them also changes. So you can see that in your own experience. Something that looks really wonderful or beautiful one day can appear the opposite the next day. So you might have this idea about a beautiful place that you love to go to. One of my friends loves to go to Paris whenever she gets the chance. And so I have these interesting discussions with her about, how can Paris be inherently wonderful? Is it always wonderful when you go there? And she says, yeah, it's fabulous. Every time I've been there, I've had a good time. So in her mind, there's this idea of Paris having this wonderfulness. But then if it was really existing from its own side, then everyone in Paris would be thinking how wonderful it is to be in Paris. But not everyone in Paris is having a great time. There's people who are homeless or etc., wishing they were somewhere else, back home, wherever they came from, for example. So you can see how this is just an idea in our mind. Another example, a friend of mine sold everything and moved up to the north coast of New South Wales because she had this idea of this fabulous life that she was going to have up there. But then when she got there, within a few months she was totally miserable because she didn't have a car for a while, so she was kind of stuck. So she was quite isolated and lonely. And then she had a few bad encounters with snakes, quite highly venomous snakes inside her house, so that was very terrifying. And then the house she bought turned out to have a lot of dry rot. And so the whole thing was a disaster, and she's just miserable. And so it's just, I'm not criticising her, this is something we all experience in our own life. And so you get this idea in your mind of this sort of fixed essence, the wonderfulness of, I forget where it was, Cove or somewhere up there, and some kind of permanent, unchanging, fabulous wonderfulness, beauty about this place, and then invest strongly in this idea, and then turns out to be, the opposite for her. And she just sold up and moved back to Elwood, where she's living happily. But so I think, maybe overall it was a good experience for her. But it's just an example of something that we all experience in our life, investing strongly in it, whether it's a place or a person or an object or a job or a career. One of my nephews is just finishing medicine, and first job in the hospital, and he's extremely stressed. He's saying, I really wish I hadn't studied medicine. I wish I'd done business. So, I'm not saying, he made a mistake. I'm not saying he's wrong. It's just this idea he had in his mind of what it was going to be like is not how it is. So, that's the idea. So I think we have to, another good example is grasping at permanence of ourself. So we have this sort of meanness. So we know from analytically, intellectually, we know that the body's changing. We can see it changing as we get older, for example. And we can see our mind is constantly changing. And we see how personality might have changed over the years, become more mature, hopefully. And so we can see that we're changing, but we still have this sort of feeling of this sort of meanness. I am this sort of unchanging I-ness. A good example is, I'm not sure if you do this, but sometimes I think of something I did, maybe 20 or 30 years ago, and I get so kind of, embarrassed about something stupid that I said, and maybe that's just me. But you can see how that's a feeling of, there's a continuity there, that I was that person who did that stupid thing 20 years ago. How embarrassing that is, you even blush thinking about it, or whack your forehead, oh my God. And so you can see how that's based on the feeling of this some kind of unchanging essence of me. Again, feel free to disagree, but I think we have, if we don't analyse, we sort of have that feeling, I'm here, I'm the same me that was here yesterday, was here last year. It was a child, growing up. It's this sort of me that's carried through. But then when you analyse, you can't find anything that you could call me. You look in all the parts of the body, obviously it's not there. They're all changed, the whole body's, all the molecules have changed. And the mind has changed, is constantly in flux. But we have this appearance of me continuing throughout our whole life. Some kind of unchanging essence. And also you might have, like I said, strong regret or feelings of guilt about things that you've done in the past. So again, that's based on this feeling of that was the same me who did those things. So I'm sort of carrying this burden of something that made me back then. So that's what we're trying to counteract. Or trying to challenge those appearances, whether it's to do with ourselves or to do with objects, to do with other people. So firstly, seeing how these misconceptions are creating problems and giving rise to other misconceptions like attachment and aversion, and how those attachment and aversion are giving rise to other problems like anxiety, depression, problems in our relationships, causing us to be irritable. So just sort of examining how these arise based on these misconceptions. And as the Dalai Lama often says, this can be a very inspiring process, because you realise that these strong afflictive states of mind which are bothering us so much, which seem so strong and overwhelming, whether it be impatience or frustration or anxiety or depression, are actually built on these misconceptions about how things are. And so by doing this kind of analysis, which is not hard to do, we can sort of cut through those misconceptions and undermine the strength of these afflictive states of mind, and free ourselves from them. So that's the idea. So it's a process of introspection and analysis, and also I think studying these ideas about impermanence and seeing how they sort of these afflictive states of mind build up based on this sort of network of misconceptions, and then sort of trying to weaken them or sort of dismantle them, you know. And I think that's a very interesting and what's the word, inspiring or exciting process, you know, when you sort of start to analyse and see how they operate, and they don't seem so kind of overwhelming and monolithic, that you can see how they're just arising because of these causes and conditions, and by breaking them down and analysing them you can undermine them, weaken their effect on yourself and on your life. So that's the idea. We just have to put it into practice. So what do you think about all that? Any thoughts, questions? Yes.
Okay. Random thought.
Yeah.
If we didn't have attachment,
Yeah.
would we then not have grief?
Right.
Just a question.
Yeah. So I think the Buddha would say yes. So grief is arising because we had this idea that, say it's a person in our life, was going to be there forever. So we kind of forgot that they were impermanent, that they could be taken away from us at any minute, and or that we could be taken away from them. So we forget about that, and we invest strongly in their being there for the foreseeable future, as long as possible. And so because we're so invested in that appearance of permanence, wanting them to be there forever, then when suddenly they're taken away, then we're devastated. And so that's the idea with this meditation on impermanence, is to familiarise your mind with that idea, so we don't invest so strongly in this appearance of permanence of things, being there forever. So we're not devastated, destroyed when reality strikes and that person or that thing or that position in your employment or your body, for example, your ability, your youth, etc. is taken away. That's the idea. Yes.
How does when you're dealing with a narcissist who's egotistical, selfish, feels, entitlement and manipulative, how do you stay and that that person's like that because of trauma, but they would still do it if try to help them. Most of them are interested in being helped. How do you deal with it so you don't become so stressed, so so it doesn't affect you so much, and it doesn't affect you how you think, like you want to kill them, because we all think those things, even if we we tell ourselves that we're angels. Well, we're not, and we either imagine that we're hurting them in a fantasy way, and we don't hurt them. Do you know what I mean? We don't literally hurt them. So how do you stay sane?
Yeah, so I think we can all sort of relate to that problem. We all have people in our lives which really challenge us, and quite a lot of problems, some more than others. And yeah, like you say, sometimes if you're sort of stuck in relationship with that person, whether it's it's your partner or your employer or someone you can't really get away from, and then you sort of got to work out ways of dealing with that, preferably without killing them or harming them. So I think the first point is that we need to be realistic. Like you say, we're not angels. We have to be realistic, so we have definite limitations about how much we can handle. So if it gets too overwhelming, then if you can remove yourself from the situation, then that's possibly the best thing to do, or at least partially, so you have more space. So hopefully that's possible, to some extent, to get some space for yourself, so you're not sort of dealing with this all the time, completely overwhelming, and make it a bit more manageable. So that's the first thing. We've got to work with our sort of limitations as what they call in Buddhism ordinary beings. We haven't got these realizations that allow us to experience abuse without being bothered by it. It does definitely affect us, when people attack us. It's painful, very painful. So that's the first thing, is to get space if you can. Then, and if you can't physically do that, then meditation can help. So for example, if you can just focus your mind, like we did before, on something like the breath, then during that time, you're not thinking about the, being attacked or the harsh words they've said or whatever it is they're doing that's harming you. So that's some kind of mental space you can get through meditation as a practice. And then in terms of your attitude towards them, like, even the Buddha was very clear about this. He said there's a limit to how much I can do, and you've got to be very clear about being realistic about the limit. So he said, I can't take away your afflictions, I can't wash them away, I can't, pluck them out. All I can do is teach you how to help yourself. So that's sort of like that's where I've got to be very realistic. I can't stop this person from doing the things they're doing. What can I do? So I can try and keep my own mind peaceful. I can try not to harm them. That might be as much as you can do. Then if possible, if there's anything you can do, to maybe help them a bit, give them a nice meal, make them a cup of tea, whatever it is that you can do, then you try to do that. So I guess that's the approach. But yeah, we have to be very realistic, I think, about how much we can do and not do. Yeah. But the aim is to try to develop compassion for a person like that, which is very challenging when they're in your face and when they're attacking you. But the idea is that these afflictive emotions are arising in that person's mind in the same way as they are in ours, in the same way as we sometimes lash out at people. They're doing the same, but theirs might be much stronger and overwhelming. So they're regarded as an object of compassion for that reason, because their mind is overwhelmed by these afflictive emotions, causing them to harm the people around them, causing them not to have friends, to be generally disliked, to be lonely, to have a very difficult life because nobody wants to help them, etc., etc. So, yeah. Yes, I think you're right. Sorry.
In talking about like permanence or impermanence, how does that relate to like a behaviour or a feeling, or because you're talking more about, so that person might behave in a certain way.
Yeah.
So how does impermanence view that in terms of you saying their behaviour will change over time, or?
Yeah, well that's one.
Like how does that relate to that conversation?
Yeah, so say for example it's an aggressive person who's attacking you verbally, and you're feeling, severe pain from their verbal attacks, constant verbal attack. So then how do you deal with that? How does understanding impermanence help with that? So I guess one thing is, like you said, understanding that the situation is impermanent. It's arising because of certain causes and conditions, and your experience of it is changing. So, for example, if you think of pain, for example, emotional pain, like you're feeling hurt by what someone said, you can, in some meditations, just focus on that feeling, the feeling of pain, of being hurt. And just focusing on the feeling, you notice that it changes. It doesn't stay the same. And even just focus, so you're not focusing on the word that they said that hurt you, you're focusing on the feeling of the hurt. You can do the same with physical pain, like in your knees. So the idea is that just by focusing your mind on that, you notice that it changes. It's not static. It's not this sort of solid thing called pain, which is stuck there. It's just something that's moving. Well, that's one way. Yes.
I was quite taken aback at your talking about these old memories of embarrassing things.
Yeah.
I have a lot of those, and they're quite intrusive. And I would be really curious to hear anything about how to change my relationship with those memories, or, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, I wonder how many people have that, or it's just me and you. It's sort of like, I remember walking down the street one day and going, like this, and this woman was coming up to me on the way and she just looked at me and she was laughing. I thought maybe she could relate to what I was going through. But yeah, I think it's interesting to think about why it's happening. Like I think I was saying last week that to me I think it's a bit like pride, because I have this idea of how I should be, and then I think about some really stupid or offensive thing that I did, way back when, and it's just sort of intolerable to my pride. That's not how I am, that's not who I am. So then it's like, oh my God, that's terrible. So that's, for me I think at least, that's sort of like an idea, a fixed idea, maybe a permanent idea of how I should be, like an ideal, and then when I deviate from that, then the pride kind of freaks out and it's intolerable. So I think that's one interesting thing to consider. And then also in terms of using mindfulness and alertness. So, as I said, the awareness of death is, one of the benefits is just the idea to focus your mind on the present. So all of those sort of thoughts about the past are actually pretty much useless. Like they're not going to help you. You can't change the past. Whatever has happened has happened. Occasionally it can be useful to reflect on the past because you learn from the past, but generally speaking, much better to focus on the present. And so we're sort of much more taking charge of our experience by focusing on the present moment, because this is what we have control over. We can control our experience in the present moment. Forget about all that stuff. And it's similar about the future. We have all these ideas about this might happen, I might do this, and I hope I can do this, and but it's mostly useless. Like it's not really helping us much. So that's the idea of focusing on the present. Yeah. Our teacher here, Geshe Doga, I think he's a good practitioner of that. He often says that mindfulness and alertness are my best friends, my two best friends, because they always keep me happy. So he said, I keep my mind in the present moment, and then I just don't worry about anything else. So all I'm focusing on is what's happening right now, who I'm talking to or what's happening. Forget about everything else. This is what's real, and my two best friends are keeping my mind happy all the time.
Which two?
Sorry, mindfulness means remembering the object. So let's say I'm having a conversation with you. Mindfulness would just be focusing on this conversation, keeping my mind, not just thinking about what I could do later or what happened before. And alertness is sort of, or introspection, sorry, is observing to check that my mind is focused. So when I start to, think about something else, you just keep it. So you can see how it makes your mind your life very simple if you're just focusing on what's happening right now. And all this other clutter is. Yes.
I just got a quick sort of thought. What if right now is terrible? What if right now in the world was going somewhere and right now it's awful?
Yeah.
What do you do then?
Yeah, so let's say you're in a terrible situation, like you're in a city that's being bombed, for example, and everyone's terrified. So then is it still better to focus on the here and now, or would it be better to think about, some beautiful time in your beautiful childhood or something? So maybe in some cases it would be better to think about something else, But generally speaking, it's said to be better to focus on the here and now and deal with what's happening to you. But then if it's too traumatic, too overwhelming, then maybe you do need to sort of retreat into, like we were saying about being attacked by a person, sort of bring your mind just back to something like the breath. It's sort of neutral and not, so you're not terrified, and then calm your mind down, and then sort of use that calmness to analyze the situation. How real is the danger? Am I really going to get hit, or is it, if am I safe in this building? There's things I can do to, sort of think rationally about the situation. But instead of panicking. Generally speaking, we have agency in the present moment. We can do something about it, and about how we're experiencing that moment. Good questions. Okay, so do you generally accept the idea that understanding impermanence would undermine something like attachment? Can you sort of see how that might work? If you're aware of something being impermanent, that you would tend not to be so attached to that object. Does that make sense? So that's the idea. And also aversion, strong aversion. Okay, thank you. Thanks for listening. And see you next week.
Thank you.